Samhain, Nos Callan Gaeth, All Hallows Eve, Halloween. Chances are, almost no matter where you live, you celebrate or know someone who celebrates a day that remembers or honors the dead in some fashion. Whether it's Dia de Muertos in Mexico, the Ghost Festival in China, or All Souls Day among Christians. Almost every religion and civilization honors the dead in some form, but we're going to be talking specifically about Halloween and its history. In modern times, Halloween has largely come to mean a day of children asking for candy from neighbors and adults making bad decisions at parties, but the history of the holiday goes back much farther than this. Most believe that the earliest roots of Halloween can be found in the ancient Celtic festival of Samhain. Samhain, the Gaelic word for November, and originally meaning summer's end, was a festival marking the end of the harvest season and the beginning of winter. Traditionally observed from sunset on October 31st to sunset on November 1st, the holiday was observed throughout Ireland and Scotland. Mythology states that celebrations of Samhain would feature alcohol, feasting, and games, and would last up to a week. It was believed that during Samhain, the doorways to the other world opened, and spirits of the dead and other supernatural beings were free to enter our world. The spirits were both respected and feared, as the Celts believed that they were responsible for the fate of their crops, but also the spirits made it easier to predict the future. To appease the spirits, they would make large bonfires and throw crops or animals as sacrifices into the fire. They would also leave food and drink outside of their homes as offerings, as well as set extra places at their tables for the spirits. Various rituals for predicting the future would occur, including roasting hazelnuts, dream interpretation, and smoke reading. Eventually, the Roman Empire conquered much of the Celtic territory, and some of their festivals merged with that of Samhain. Specifically, Parentalia, a festival held in honor of family ancestors, and the celebration of Pomona, who was most commonly associated with apples. This is likely where the bobbing for apples tradition came from. In 609 AD, Pope Boniface IV rededicated the Roman Temple of Pantheon to St. Mary and all the martyrs on the 13th of May, which became known as All Hallows Day, hallow meaning saint. This coincided with the date of Lemuria, an ancient Roman pagan ritual of the dead. Over 200 years later, Pope Gregory IV would move the date from May to November 1st, the same date as Samhain. It's debated exactly why the change was made, although it is a very fitting time for the holiday, as it's a time when many things in nature die off. As many major feasts in Christianity had a vigil the night before, October 31st became known as All Hallows Eve, and November 2nd became All Souls Day, to commemorate all the dead. The 3 days were known as All Hallowtide. It is likely the Catholic Church adopted the holiday as a way to replace the pagan festival of Samhain with a more church-sanctioned one, although in Ireland they celebrated All Saints' Day on April 20th to avoid that very same connection. Traditions involved with All Hallowtide included ringing church bells for souls in purgatory, criers parading the streets dressed in black, and groups of poor people, especially children, going door to door and collecting special cakes. These cakes, known as soul cakes, were baked for the souls of the dead, and collectors, called soulers, would take them in exchange for praying for the dead. The soul cakes would then be offered for the souls to eat, or they would eat them themselves as representatives of the dead. This is likely the main inspiration for the modern tradition of trick-or-treating. Some would dress up as saints themselves, or in costumes to avoid vengeful spirits identifying them. This tradition is possibly based on earlier rituals of dressing as the dead, and would continue on to many other parts of the world. During the Reformation of the Church of England, the Protestants attacked the customs of All Hallowtide, as it was specifically incompatible with their theology. Much of the beliefs surrounding the spirits of the dead within Catholicism at the time were related to purgatory, the belief that souls of the dead were held in a state of limbo before they could enter heaven. As Protestants had discarded the notion of purgatory, they came to believe that any spirits of the dead returning to earth were in fact evil. Not all Protestants believed this, but many discarded the traditions of All Hallowtide, instead blessing their homes to ward against evil spirits and witches. The rise of Guy Fawkes Night in the early 17th century in Britain led many of the traditions of All Hallowtide to be transferred to that holiday instead. During this time, All Hallows Eve became known as Halloween, shortened from Hallowed Evening. Back in Ireland and Scotland, the tradition of guising began to take hold. Children dressed in disguises of spirits or supernatural beings went from door to door, often carrying a lantern made out of a scooped-out turnip, and recited verses or songs for food or coins. If the home gave food, it could expect good fortune in the future, and if not, it could expect misfortune. This of course led some youths to bring the misfortune themselves, and began playing pranks on those who were not plentiful in their offerings. The scooped-out turnips and other root vegetables were often placed outside homes with candles inside of them to either represent spirits, or to ward them away. This eventually became the common tradition of setting out jack-o'-lanterns. For a while, in North America, the traditions of Halloween did not catch on, largely due to the strong Protestant influence. However, in the 1800s, large amounts of Irish and Scottish immigrants came to America, and brought with them their traditions of guising, parties, and decorating for the spirits. By the early 1900s, Halloween was being celebrated across the United States. Over time, the industrialization and commercialization of America went to work, and Halloween became a highly profitable holiday, filled with mass-produced costumes, decorations, activities, and candy. In fact, over a quarter of all candy sold in the United States is sold around Halloween. During this time, many of the associations with All Hallowtide and the Christian influences have been forgotten, and instead the holiday has become more focused on communities and fascination with the dead and supernatural. While I could hardly cover the entire history of such a long-lived holiday in such a short video, I hope I've given you an interesting look at a fascinating part of history. It's interesting to see how traditions and celebrations change throughout hundreds of years, and how they're influenced by folklore, religious beliefs, and common interests. While the oldest form of Halloween was meant to both celebrate the dead as well as predict the future, modern Halloween has forgotten many of its original intentions, while still keeping much of the same feeling. Although it's unlikely Halloween will continue in its present form over the next 2,000 years, human beings will always have some fascination with the dead.